As a wave across the land, we are moving. It takes one step, it takes your voice, saying, I am not hearing if you are not naming it. I am not stopping if you are not changing it. Here are my hands, let's see what they're making. In the morning, in the rise up, there's a bridge from all that's been in the dawning. The vines are pushing through the pavement. We were born of burning hearts. We are tearing off the reins. From the ground up we will build it. From the clouds above we'll rain it. From the crowd up we will raise it. From the ground up.
I'm Nisha Moodley, and this is Devotion, the podcast about showing up in new ways to weave a new world together. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2. In today's conversation, I get to talk with my longtime friend, Christine Gutierrez, who is a Latina licensed psychotherapist, life coach, and expert in love addiction, trauma, abuse, and self-esteem. And actually, right after we finished recording, Christine received the notification that her book, I Am Diosa, had hit number 1 on Amazon for the self-esteem category. So that's super exciting. And in our wide-ranging conversation, we talk about everything from healing from trauma and abuse to boundaries, to reclaiming aspects of our identity and expression that don't fit in with dominant culture's ideals, and so much more. So I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with my friend, Christine Gutierrez. Christine, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. It's been a while.
So grateful to be here.
So before we started recording, you said maybe we could take a couple deep breaths together, and I think that sounds great, and everyone listening can breathe with us. So I'll follow your lead. You breathe, and I'll breathe with you.
Wonderful. If everyone can just put their left hand on their heart, their right hand over it. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Inhale in, filling up the belly, and exhale it out through the mouth. We call ourselves back from all time and all places. We call ourselves back from all time and all places. We call ourselves back from all time and all places. We are here now. We call ourselves back home today. For however far away we have strayed, we call ourselves back home today. Back home, home, into our internal home, soul home, soul home.
Thank you. So, Christine, I love to begin with a land acknowledgement, and I'm curious about the land on which you are presently standing. I don't know if you're at home right now, but I'd love to hear anything that you want to share about the land on which you presently stand and your relationship to that land.
I love that question. Well, right now, I am in my home that we just bought right before COVID started getting serious in Puerto Rico, in Sidra, Puerto Rico. And this house was actually my husband's family's, like their country house in El Campo in Puerto Rico. And so we have all of our tropical fruits and our palm trees all around us, and we're in the mountains. So it's the land of my ancestors.
Wow, that's so special. Are both you and Fernando from the same region?
We are. Well, he was actually born here in Puerto Rico. I was born in New York. And so I'm a New Yorican, as they say. And he's Boricua, full Boricua, born here, raised here. And so my grandparents were born in Puerto Rico, and his entire family as well.
Wow. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you identify, because I feel like, even though you and I know each other and we've known each other for a long time, well, first of all, not everyone here knows you. But also, I don't know. I think we can get these ways of like labeling one another or creating identities for one another and then fixing on those. So, also, as we begin, I'd love to hear just a little bit more about how you identify today, now in your life.
Wow, I love your questions. For me, I have always identified as Latina. I have always identified as Puerto Rican. I have never, in terms of sexuality, I have never, I it was always like a confusing thing to talk about because in my brain it wasn't that confusing. I just thought, I'm just fluid. I just like who I like. And so I guess for me that the terms weren't there back in the day, like queer, bi, like there wasn't terms. And for me now, I feel like this is a new world where I finally get to say out loud, yeah, I am queer. I am Latina. And labels never really felt that great, but I think it was because of the way people use them. And I see so much more love being used around these words now. And it's helped me to release inner shame that I've had.
Yeah, it's, before we started recording, I asked you to remind me how you say your last name because, again, we've known each other for maybe 10 years. And so I have the way that I say your last name in my head, but I'm like, I don't know, I haven't verified that in 10 years. It might be totally wrong. And I would love for you to just share what you shared with me because it was such for me, like a powerful example of the ways that identity, it's like peeling back layers of an onion for so many of us over our lifetimes. And yeah, I'd love for you to share what you shared about your name.
Yeah, so I always said Christine Gutierrez. If you listen to my old kind of podcasts or meditations, Christine Gutierrez was what I would say. And my husband was like, why do you say your name so white? Like, why don't you say Christine Gutierrez? And I was like, I guess I changed the way I spoke in order to feel accepted by what I thought was the dominant white culture. And that's the truth. I remember me changing my voice, and I'm still looking at the ways that I've done that to myself and the ways that I've taken away pieces of my identity because I was trying to fit in, probably out of safety or protection in some way. I remember my mom being like, you don't want to be the ghetto girl that sits on your stoop in Bushwick in Brooklyn, where I grew up. And that was like a very classic thing to do. And it was because she didn't want me to seem like something. And a lot of that had to do with being Latina. And so I had to, it was kind of my role in my family to really stand and say, I'm proud to be Latina and I'm proud to be who I am and speak the way I do and be okay with my culture, not only as a Latina woman, but growing up as a New Yorican woman in Brooklyn. And it's important that I start to reclaim that and, use the way my name was intended to be said, Gutierrez. And so it's a reclaiming of that. And it's been important, even with my book, I Am Diosa. It was hard for me to accept the name of the title of my book. I was scared. I was scared that it wasn't going to be accepted or that it wasn't mainstream enough. All the shit that we're told because we have been right in this industry for a while. And when I first came in, it was just because my heart, my soul wanted to help and heal people. But there is a wellness industry. There is a personal development market. And it was mostly white. And so I took those beliefs that were maybe if you use diosa, it won't be good. It won't sell. And so all of this has been about coming back to and acclaiming of what I call my cultural confidence and being confident and standing in that and not caring and not giving a fuck about anything other than if this is true for my soul, then that's where I have to stand. I've always spoke directly to Latino and POC communities have been my focus. And so why not continue to and stand in that truth? And that's what I did when I named the book I Am Diosa.
Cultural confidence. I hear you say that. I can feel both the part of me that's like, yeah, and I can also feel that, like, the little brown girl inside of me that's like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
dangerous, you know? And the ways that, as you spoke to, like the ways that we are taught to and can learn to as little children, who aren't white, or who don't predominantly identify as white, to gain proximity to whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
in the ways that we speak, in the ways that we look, in the ways that we, for me as a little Indian girl, like the ways that I smelled. It was like, oh, I smell
Mm-hmm.
like curry. I gotta
Yeah.
fix this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm curious because you've really shared your voice so beautifully, around cultural appropriation and the erasure and the exclusion of some voices, of some like historically marginalized voices. And I've really appreciated you speaking up around that because, well, for many reasons. One, it's really helped me feel that resonance inside of myself and be more willing to see it happening, that erasure and that exclusion, and also feel the pain of it and
Mm-hmm.
feel validated in the pain of it. Um, and also, I think because this is how we change culture, right? Like, this is how we shift away from a dominant culture that is fixed into a new, maybe more integrative, truly equitable or inclusive culture. And
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm curious about, you named your name, but I'm wondering what other, for yourself personally, like what else have you had to reclaim or claim in your journey away from colonialism, away from, uh, white dominance? Like, what have you had to reclaim and claim for yourself?
I mean, I think in many ways, my story has always come back to where are the lost parts of me, right? Whether
Mm,
the lost parts of me are because I suffered from being in a household that had abuse and that used language that was verbally abusive to put me down and crushed my self-esteem, right? Then there was a reclaiming of my worth. There was a reclaiming of I matter, I'm loved. And in religion, right, growing up Catholic and going to Catholic school almost throughout like my whole life, from pre-K to even college, because I went to Fordham for my undergrad, and that's a Jesuit school. And so the reclaiming of the feminine voice of the divine, which I felt was silent almost in Catholicism, or it was very black and white. Either you're the virgin or you're the whore. And intuitively, even though I didn't have the language for it at the time, I remember being very upset. I was upset that I was spoken to that way in my house. I knew something was wrong. I was upset that there wasn't as much voices, feminine voices, that I could say that I look up to, because I was always really close to spirituality. And
mm,
that kind of fuel, that anger, that fuel led me to say, well, how and where can I reclaim those lost parts of me? And for me, this is like the spiritual journey of finding all of those soul pieces that we lose because we've been injured in some way, psychologically or spiritually.
mm. Yeah, one of the parts of your tagline of your book, which, by the way, congratulations, your book is
Thank
coming out. I
you.
am Diosa, a
Yes.
journey to healing deep, loving yourself, and coming back home to soul. And when I read that, coming back home to soul, I thought about, this question that often comes up around, like, is it the voice of my soul or my intuition, or is it my fear talking? Like, that is such a prevalent question. And I've been thinking lately a lot about how really dangerous it is when we don't know the difference. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't know the difference. I think, like, how different would the world be if that was part of what we were taught as little children?
Absolutely.
Or not untaught, not taught our way out of, maybe is another way to say it, but like how to discern that difference, because those kind of gut feelings that people have that they take, like the fears that we take as intuition, like that's what leads to the murders of Black and brown people, because I don't know, I just felt afraid. I thought I saw a gun, or I thought all of these things, right? These serious life impacting transgressions against Black and brown and Indigenous people, queer people, trans people. Those are, I believe, they're fear driven. And so what I'm curious about, because you're a therapist, and I know that's a big thing that's shaped your work. And because these sort of what people would call their gut feelings maybe are often shaped by fear and also influenced by our own personal traumas, I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about how we can identify the voice of our soul as distinct from our fear or conditioning, especially when our conditioning runs so deep and can be interwoven with trauma and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two separate things. One is that if we are here in the United States, then we know that a lot of what our country has been built on hatred. And it's hard to say, right, what is my gut versus what is my soul in this kind of way, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to the systematic racism and everything that needs to change, right? Like and I don't personally know enough to speak to all the things we need to change. What I do know is that everything is based on what you said, fear and hatred, right? And there's been systems built on that, and history books that don't tell real stories, that paint Africa as being poor when there were riches, that are not representative of the Black and brown and Indigenous people's stories, right? Celebrating a man that, in textbooks to little children, that minds are being shaped when he was a rapist and a killer, right? So this is the kind of world we live in. And we're seeing that right now with Black Lives Matter, but this is not something that is new, right? Black and brown and Indigenous people have been living and experiencing that for centuries, right? And people just didn't know what it looked like, or maybe we are, more white presenting, didn't have that personal lived experience, and were blind or ignorant to it, right? But I think that question leads more to having to make actual systemic changes, right? And I do believe that everything's connected on a spiritual, personal, psychological level. The only people that I'm interested in personally working with are people that already know that, right? That already have some sort of humanity in them. There's just people that are really evil out there. And that's a whole nother story, right? But for the people that maybe have downloaded some prejudice, and we all have, right? That have been told these stories that lead to you judging someone without even knowing them. Well, it's going to take a lot more than just checking in with your intuition and taking a deep breath in and meditating. You're going to have to do the work, hire people that are experts in anti-racism, do therapy, and have a desire to want to change the parts of you that are judgmental. And so for me, where I go to with the difference between your fear and soul, right, is being able to check in and say, is this coming from a place of, I know that this is for the better good of myself, that this is leading me and others, not only you, is this leading me and others to becoming our most aligned, highest, loving selves? If your actions are hurting you or others, then you are not in alignment with your soul.
Mm. I love, first of all, that you named that the work is deep, right? It's like, this isn't just you know, oh, I'm gonna 101 figure out what the voice of my soul is versus fear and then
No,
done. It's like the deep work of peeling back the layers of conditioning and asking ourselves, and not just peeling back the layers of conditioning, but first noticing the conditioning. It's like noticing the prejudices, noticing when are we afraid, and are there some patterns there? What's that all about? Like really noticing that, and then doing the work of really peeling back the layers. And then the second thing that I heard you speak to is just to, like, in that distinction of soul versus the voice of our soul or intuition versus the voice of fear, really parsing out and noticing, like, is this moving not just me but we? Is it moving us in the direction of well-being, upliftment, love, or is there harm here?
that's
Do
right.
I have to win and they have to lose? And then that's what my version of win, like, that's my soul? No, soul
That's right.
doesn't operate that way.
That's right. I always say, there's, like in the spiritual community, it's like we're all one. And it's like we are all one on a deep fundamental level, right? We're all children of God, brothers and sisters. But in real life, that's not how people are treated. And therefore, if until we have true equality and true oneness, meaning that Black, brown, indigenous, trans bodies that are marginalized, peoples that are marginalized are given the respect, the justice, the love, the laws to protect them, then we are not actually one yet. And therefore, our
Mm.
true spiritual mission as we are doing this work, right? Because my work is geared towards helping people come back to their soul, unpacking their childhood trauma, unpacking their, addictions and the way they're acting out so that they can love themselves. In that is to be a better human in the world too, right? The two can't be separate. You can't just want to help yourself and then not help others. You can't just want freedom for yourself and not want freedom for others. You can't want to be free from your, trauma from abuse and not care about the systemic abuse that's happening. They all are connected.
Mm. Oh, yes, to this. When you're talking about that, it reminds me of something else I wanted to ask you about. Because that I often hear that we are all one notion, which, as you said, there's a spiritual truth to it, and it's not the whole truth. It doesn't tell the whole story, maybe.
Exactly.
That idea, that concept, and also, Martin Luther King Jr. quotes to back it up, Dr. King quotes to back it up, are often weaponized, I find, against calls for justice, calls for
Absolutely.
action. Like, if you somehow name the problems of systemic racism, then somehow you are being part of the problem because you're talking about race, and if we could just stop talking about it, then it would stop being a problem. And that term, right, spiritual bypassing, which I heard was kind of introduced by a Buddhist teacher and psychotherapist, John Wellwood, early 80s, although I'm sure it's a notion that has transcended some time and space now.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that you talk about in the book is cultivating healthier coping skills.
Yes.
And it's interesting because that notion, I think, kind of flies in the face of what we're often taught in new age circles about thriving all the time and being super high vibe, and like, we don't want to cope, we want to be, flying high at all times. And I would love to hear you
I,
talk a little bit
I
talk a
gotta
little
laugh.
bit. Yeah, I mean, talk to me about why this focus on coping skills is important and not something. Talk to me about that versus this kind of like, we should be high vibe and thriving and, like, forget about coping. We should be whatever, transcending?
Yeah.
And why are coping skills important?
First of all, I think it's abusive to tell someone that has gone through trauma and has gone through everything that they've gone through, which a lot of people that come to this work do have some form of, that they should be something all the time, or that they should rise above something. It's very anti-human. It's not realistic. It's not the way the psyche works. Many of us struggle with panic attacks. I got anxiety attacks for years. And if I come to someone for healing and they're like, you should be high vibe all the time, now I'm going to shame myself for feeling panic and anxiety in my body, which happened as a result of my childhood abuse? No. So what is a psychologically grounded approach would be something more like, I see you and I hear that you're having anxiety. That must be really difficult. And it sounds like you've gone through some really hard things and your nervous system is having a response to them. And while that's normal, let's talk about some ways to cope with the anxiety that you're experiencing in your body. You're not alone. And that approach is very different than let's be high vibe all the time. It's not real and it's dangerous. And so something that I want everyone who's listening to know is that if you've been in that kind of circle for a while, is to give yourself permission to heal from that language and to come to a space of understanding that maybe you do suffer from depression. Maybe you're someone that's just not happy all the time. Maybe you're someone that's currently living in a world that oppresses you. Maybe you're someone that is struggling with something, like you're mourning the death of someone you love, or you're dealing with an illness. I don't want anyone to feel that they should be anything all the time. But I rather people know that they're allowed to be who they are, including holding space for all of their emotions. One line that I say in the book is, this is not about being happy all the time, but it's about holding varying emotions at once and then working with those emotions, right? Allowing ourselves to feel into them and explore those emotions. Because just that shift in perspective of knowing that it's okay to be human, which basically a lot of the new age kind of spiritual world is basically creating this false illusion of humanity and a very high standard that inevitably is going to hurt a person's self-esteem, because if they're aiming for that and get disappointed, they're going to feel even worse. So what we want to look for is like small, sustainable changes. Yeah, you know what? Sometimes I'm going to feel shitty. Yeah, you know what? Sometimes I still fuck up. Yep, that's true. That's real.
Like, whoa, hallelujah, we get to be humans. We don't have to be, I don't know, superhuman, transhuman, some beyond humanness, that we get to actually be human beings, having our complex human experience. I mean, I think that a lot of times, maybe because we haven't been taught how to navigate grief inside of community or in a kind of culturally rooted context, there's this fear, understandable fear, that if we go there, if we let ourselves really feel the pain that we're feeling or the confusion or the heartbreak, that we will get consumed by it. And yeah, I'm wondering what you would say to somebody who might be feeling some of that fear of feeling the depths, and also what have you found to be a way to move forward when there's that fear of really going there, but also not going there. It causes a different kind of suffering.
Yeah, there's a primal energy, right? The death energy and life energy. And there is a fear, right? Even when you have a panic attack, you feel like you're going to die. And sometimes going to the root of our pain, it does feel like we're going to die. And that's why it's so important to have someone, a trained professional, who's a therapist or a spiritual guide, who's really grounded and rooted in this kind of knowledge, right? That they will hold space for you as you navigate your inner psychological terrains, as you go to those nooks and crannies of the timeline of your life and revisit some scary doors that need to be open, and that you have someone to kind of be there and hold you, because it is scary, right? And it's okay to be scared. I am always a little bit scared when I'm doing something new. And sometimes I'm so scared that it's paralyzing. And that paralyzing feeling makes me want to stay in the comfort of doing the thing that I know is not good for me, right? Like when I was in very toxic, abusive relationships, the idea of facing the wound of my childhood abuse and the root of my insecurity felt like, forget it, I don't want to go there. I'd rather just live through this. This is more comfortable. But that illusion of that comfort, because it was familiar to my home, which was, a mixture of love and abuse, was not really going to be sustainable for my happiness in the long run. But it was comfort in the moment because it was familiar, although not healthy. And so I had to get that support, get that help to be able to go through the pain, right? And have someone that was skilled at holding me and hearing me and validating me and letting me know you're not crazy, and let's breathe through this. Let's do this. Let's explore this. And through that journey, you find that you heal because you're seen in those dark parts of you that you've kept hidden. And so part of that therapeutic process is not just, the skill set, but it's literally love. I've always said, this was something that in my master's program, I remember I had a Black professor who was the definition of non-traditional, and it was everything I ever wanted, because she was the person that told me it's okay to love your clients. And, clinical kind of studies or clinical training, they're very cold almost. And being this, Puerto Rican loving woman, it was hard for me not to imagine that love was some sort of force in my room when I was healing people, because it was my love that was not healing them, but creating a space for them to heal themselves. And so part of that journey with someone is that they get to see you and hold you. And so if you're someone that's looking for that, I would absolutely recommend you get that support.
I love that. Love is a healing force, and also just the power of acknowledgement. When I was doing my family constellation training, what we learned was that so much of what would move, kind of open the lines of love in a family system was straight up just acknowledgement. One member of the family system acknowledging to another member, I did this and it hurt you. I hear that, or whatever it might be. But just there is something, it doesn't fix everything for sure. But not having it there is so painful. And so I really hear that having that support and the space held from people or from a person who can just hold the acknowledgement of what we're feeling. And I think probably also because so often those deepest pains have been gaslit by others, have been denied by others, and therefore get denied and repressed or suppressed inside of ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, part of that is, in particular with abuse, is that you're constantly being gaslighted and you're being told, no, your reality is not what you're feeling. And you're like, am I going crazy? I'm feeling this. And so that validation from a healthy, grounded person, hopefully, right, if you're working with a good therapist or guide, they're going to do exactly what you said. They're going to validate you and let you know that you're not crazy and that your experience matters and your story matters and your feelings matter.
I'm so curious to hear you talk a little bit about relationships with other people. I think often as we're doing our healing work, it can bring up a lot from our history and our relationships with our family members or, partners or friends or, colleagues, so forth, basically the close relationships in our lives. And I'm wondering for you to share a little bit about your philosophy on how to be with those relationships. I know a lot of times there's, relationships, a lot of therapists often will guide folks to end relationships with people, to distance in relationships, or others might focus more on repair. How can a person discern with those relationships where there has been pain or tension, harm caused even, whether to lean in or whether to lean out, and how to know when it's the time for each?
Yeah, it's a very individual process, and that's the hard part, right? Is that you can't exactly tell every person in the world this is what you should do or shouldn't do. But when you are in a abusive relationship where you're being caused harm to, this is the time to get help so that you can properly and safely leave. This is the time to properly and safely leave, because there are certain steps that you need to do if you are in an abusive relationship that are not just getting up and leaving. So having someone that's trained in domestic violence in this case to help you take the proper steps to separate, right? That's a very obvious, but sometimes not obvious when you're in it, right? And so that is something that's not known. Some people think, just tell the person to leave. But usually it is at the end of the relationship when the person, the victim of abuse who's actually being abused, is most at risk if they leave. So having a safety plan for their departure is really important. So that's a time where you want to separate, but you want to do so with someone that's trained in domestic violence to help you. And then there are other situations where maybe you're not in immediate danger, but you're in a relationship with a family member who does continue to abuse you or hurt you in ways that maybe reminded you of your childhood. And I think it's important to have healthy boundaries and distance when you are an adult and you are learning to heal your inner child, because it is very difficult to heal in the same environment in which created that wound in the first place. And so having healthy boundaries for some seasons, right? Like it's a flow. There might be some seasons where you feel safer to speak to your father or your mother or a cousin or friend. And there might be some seasons where you're doing deep work where you say, this is not the time. It's not safe for me. I don't have the emotional capacity to be able to have the boundaries I need, and therefore I'm going to take my distance. And if you're in the space to do that, then I recommend doing that. I'm not of the camp that believes that just because your family is your family, that you have to be ever forgiving, ever loving. If they are causing you harm, I believe that you can create the family you always wanted by healing yourself and choosing your chosen family. But I do believe in repairing things that feel like real change has happened. And so what I mean by that is if you feel that someone has done their inner work and that you feel safe to give it a try, that maybe you do so slowly and cautiously, right? Because trust is earned, but that you allow yourself to witness if the person has actually applied changes into their life, not only with you, but in the world, right? And that's where you can go slow and steady and see and ask yourself, be mindful and be curious and say, does this relationship nurture me? Does this relationship remind me that I'm worthy? Does this relationship give me permission to be myself? And having that moment to ask yourself these questions, hopefully you'll be able to be guided to who should be in your life and who shouldn't.
I've thought sometimes and said at times that I trust myself, and I know that there are places in my life where I can't trust myself right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, the places where we have been out of sync with our own soul. The places where we have harmed ourselves or harmed others, or we kind of keep habitually making decisions that aren't healthy. And I think it's so helpful to know for each of us, like, who are the people in our lives or the person in our lives. Sometimes it's just one person. And if that person doesn't exist, maybe it's finding that person, hiring a therapist or cultivating a deeper relationship with a friend. But that person who does see that area of our lives clearly, more clearly than we are, and is willing to be honest with us. And I think that my life would have turned out very differently if I think about my Auntie Lynn, who I actually don't even know, but it's a friend, an old friend of my mom's, who, when I was 3 years old, she said to my mom, if you don't leave, meaning my father, if you don't leave, what are you teaching your daughter about love? And at the time, my mom couldn't really, I think, as far as I understand how the story went, couldn't really fully take that in. And it ended up breaking their friendship. But it stuck with her. And she knew that she was sort of haunted by those words in a good way. Someone had spoke truth to her about this thing that she wasn't trustable for herself around because she wasn't making a healthy decision. She was staying in this super toxic dynamic with my dad. And she left. But she left because those words stuck with her and haunted her. And I think in that way, in some ways, my Auntie Lynn, who I don't even really know, has profoundly changed my life because of the decisions that my mom took based on what she was saying, of that truth that she was speaking.
There's parts of our psyche that are underdeveloped, right? And there's parts that there's a story in the book by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola, these Women Who Run with the Wolves. And there's a story, I'm not going to say the whole story and mess it up. I highly recommend reading that book to anyone who's listening. It's deeply impacted me. And there's a story about sisters, and one of them was looking for her husband, and she thought he had everything, and he was so charming and perfect. And her sisters at first were so excited, and they go to this, house, and there's one secret door in the house, and the guy says, don't look in that one door. He says, whatever you do, you can go all through the mansion, but don't touch that one door. And she was like, okay, I guess I won't. And the sisters were suspicious, and they started to get curious, and they wanted to go open that door that the supposedly perfect husband had said not to open. And in this story, which is much more beautiful than what I just described, says that the sisters represent that intuition, right? That part of the woman's psyche that was underdeveloped, and she needed to call on other healthier aspects of her psyche, which in this case represented her sisters. And how many times do we need, right, to know? I love what you said. There are certain areas I don't trust myself in. And that is beautiful for us to know that about ourselves. There are certain areas I don't trust myself in either. And that's good, because it knows I'm not good in that area. Get help. You're gonna fuck up. So get help, right? It's beautiful to know that. And then you start to repair those injured parts of your psyche by gaining help from a more sane part of your world. And if maybe that means, your meditation can offer those kind of higher insights, or maybe it's an actual person, like we talked about, a therapist or a sister friend, someone that that you can trust. That's like, hey girl, I think you're bugging. I don't think you're right. Like, I think that this is coming from a place of your fear, and you can't see it because you're so in it. You know how many times I've had to do that with my cousin, Natalie, who, she's like my little secret therapist. And she knows me since childhood. So I can tell her, baby, am I being crazy or am I good? No, bitch, you're being crazy. Okay, cool. Why? Break it down for me. And I have enough trust with her that I can see the parts of me that need help, that need to grow up. And we need people like that in our life to remind us of that. And, sometimes we just need someone to have our back until we figure it out, and to be patient with us, because that's important too. But that part of our our world as women, especially, is so important. But all of us, as souls, we need people in our life that we can go to help us through this journey, because it's confusing and it's tricky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And colonization, man, it's messed us up,
It
all of
has.
us in different ways. I want to talk about your love
Yes.
because I remember when you two, I don't know when you got together, but when it was like Instagram official.
Yes.
I remember at some point I messaged you on Instagram or texted you or something and said something about how your love was really inspiring me. And man, all the I don't know why I keep saying man, but it's like when those damn magazines that we grew up with that told us what we needed to do to change ourselves so that we would be just right, to call in the one, so that we would be attractive. I don't want to talk about what we have to change about ourselves, but what I want to know is, what did you have to remember about yourself in order to say yes to a healthy relationship?
I think that without a doubt, I had to remember that I was worthy of loving myself even deeper. And my sobriety was absolutely, I call it like the soul glue. It really stuck all the parts of my life, together that were, okay, I went to therapy. Okay, I did this spiritual work, but something was still missing. And for me, my sobriety and my program with sobriety kind of glued everything together. And it allowed me to really deeply in my bones feel, okay, I got myself. I love myself. I can say no to the things that don't serve me, that aren't good for me. I can say yes to the things that are good for me. And I know I'll slip up, but I'm getting better at it. And that journey of really cutting out one of the biggest things that was still in my life that was separating me from coping in a healthy way allowed me to date myself, love myself. And, this is not just one thing, it's many things. And I talk about this in the book. It's not just one time and then everything got better. I'm still going through shit. I'm still learning and unpacking. And oh my God, it's so annoying. I joke that I'm like, what did I do in my past life to, to have to clean up so much shit, right? Because I feel like it's always something. I'm very complex. But what I know for sure is that things have gotten better from the hell I was living, better from the misery, the loneliness that I was living. And so, are things perfect? No, I don't know if it'll ever be, right? But I do know that my life is more in alignment with the version that I know my soul would have me be. And that I pray that I can keep doing the work to keep being happy and having more joy in my life, because, that is what this is about, right? Is that we get to do this work so that we can have joy, and so we can gift people the opportunity to have joy in their life too, in our relationships in the world, with our children, when we have our families, and so on. And so, for me, romance was about still, about where was I still not loving myself. And when I started to really realize that, like, okay, I did this work, but there was still a missing piece. I was still acting out from a place of destruction, that I needed to go there. And when I went there, I was celibate for almost a year and didn't date or didn't flirt or didn't do anything. And I was very strictly committed to my own process. Do I think everyone has to do that? No. Do I think that will work for everyone? No. But for me, it worked. And it allowed me to get clear on who I was and who I wasn't, and what I wanted and what I didn't want.
Wow. And knowing you, imagine that was really a process of, and tell me if I'm off course here, but just a process of listening to your own soul and the directive of your own soul in making those choices. Is that true?
Oh yeah. And, I had already been doing this work for a long time. And I always say this, like, we have to stay humble, 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 like feet on the ground, humble, like what's still not working. Because that's the only way we're going to keep healing. And I knew, I was like, this shit, something's not right still. and again, it's like you said in the beginning, it's appealing, right? And being gentle with ourselves, knowing, girl, you've gone through so much, right? You've healed so much. Like, give yourself permission to be proud and notice the areas that are still hurting you, because I was still hurting me. And so it felt like I heard that voice. It was like, I had heard it many times and I ignored it. It was just get sober. Drinking might not be good for you. Maybe if it's a little bit like a toss of a dice every time and you don't know what's going to happen at the end of the night, you might not want to do that. And eventually it happened enough times that I got scared and I was like, okay, I am going to make a change. And for me, again, this was a very personal choice. I walked into AA with one of my dear friends who's also still sober today. And we walked into AA. I raised my little hand. I was like, hi, my name is Christine and I'm an alcoholic. I didn't even know if I resonated with that word, but I didn't care because I knew that alcohol was bringing damage to my life. And that whole program and everything that came with it was so strange. But what was worse was the way I was living. And, on the outside, I had already come really far. And had I been stubborn and been like, no, I shouldn't go there, or like, let my judgments get the best of me, or like, no, just go to therapy. Like, I heard very specifically, go to AA. And I did. And it really has been and still is such a grounding force for me, because it's the thing that really keeps me to be able to do this work. Because when I was drinking, I wasn't even able to sustainably do this work. And it wasn't like I was drinking every day. It was just when I drank, I couldn't stop, or I didn't know what the night was going to end up like. And so for me, I didn't know that was also a form of alcoholism. It was like a binge drinker. And so it was really powerful. And it's to this date, it's probably one of the things I'm most proud of is my sobriety.
Wow. Congratulations. How long has it been?
I got sober October 8th, 2016. So 3 years and change now.
Awesome. That's so beautiful. Well, I'm really inspired by you and just your devotion to your own healing and reclamation. And you have this book coming out, which I'm super excited about. I Am Diosa. And you talked about this earlier a bit, but I was thinking this before we got on, and I just have to say, I feel like when a white person writes a book, it's kind of assumed that it's for everyone, at least everyone who's part of that market. And because of overculture's normalization of whiteness, like white equals normal or standard, when people who don't fit the gender binary or who aren't white or who, right, that all of a sudden it becomes a book just for those people of that identity. And I can see how some folks could see the title, I Am Diosa, and say, oh, this must be for Latinx women, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I want to name that. And I want to hear a little bit more about what inspired you to name the book I Am Diosa. We heard a little bit about your kind of tussle with the name, but what inspired you to name it I Am Diosa, and who is it for?
Yeah, so I Am Diosa is about returning back to that space of your divinity and reclaiming all those lost pieces of your soul, and doing it in a grounded and psychologically savvy kind of way that doesn't hurt you more than help you, right? We want to be able to know that this healing is going to be able to be a slow and steady thing. It doesn't have to be a race. It doesn't have to be perfect, that it's non-linear. That is the whole intention behind I Am Diosa. And one of the things that you said, that you spoke to is absolutely true. This book is for anyone that resonates with it. But my primary focus has always been Latino POC communities, because I feel like a lot of our stories, there's some resonance there. And then for anyone that's gone through trauma and has wants to rise from it, for anyone who's been on this journey and says, yeah, I want to go to those roots and do the deep work so that I can truly love myself at my core, not just on the surface, and really change patterns that have been affected by the past, so that they can change their relationship to themselves and others. And so that is something that I feel so excited about too, that like that's named in the beginning of the book too. I say, like, you know, if the pronouns don't work, cross out the book, make it your own. You know, like, this book is for you, because that has always been what my work has been about. And I don't want, you know, I also think that is so also the reason why so many Latino spaces, like a lot of media companies, have failed, because they think, well, if I call it, you know, Latino, then all the Latinos are going to do it. And it's like, we are part of the mainstream. We are the majority, you know, like, we are growing. And so all of these things that are like, no, this is for everyone. And also naming that it has a primary demographic that has always been my demographic in my personal work throughout these, you know, 12 years that I've been doing this work. So I feel like people that are going to vibe with it are going to feel the energy behind it. And the white women that I've worked with are women who usually have gone through a lot of lived experiences through trauma, abuse, that are pretty heavy, that helps them identify in some way with a lot of the other POC communities, not necessarily identity-wise, but in terms of specific verbal, physical, sexual abuse. And so, yeah, if you resonate with it, I hope that you'll take that leap and go for it. And to all my, all my gay, trans, I always say, like, you're a diosa, men are diosas, everyone's a diosa, because it's not about this kind of old version of femininity. It's not like you're the diosa because you're a girl. That doesn't exist, right? So it's about claiming that and knowing that this is about activating that primal Shakti, feminine energy that is the mother core, but that doesn't belong to any quote unquote gender or norm that we have seen in the past. This is for everyone.
I also think that it's so powerful and important for us to read books from people who don't share from people who do share identities with us, and also especially if we're talking about reading books written by non-dominant identities. I think that's that we don't share, right?
Yeah.
That is so powerful and meaningful and important to get ourselves in one another's worlds, to see where the threads overlap with our individual experience and someone else's experience and the wisdom that they have to offer, and also to see where they don't, you know, and honor
Absolutely.
those places and spaces. And this is how we learn together, how we grow together and deepen together. And I think something that I've always been really touched and moved by about you is that you bring such depth to your work and to your perspectives, the perspectives that you share, and also so much like playfulness and levity and humor. And also that while you're always inviting us to be more full, like more fully embodied, more fully expressed, more alive, to be able to like expand our capacity to feel more, to live more, to love more, right? At the same time, it's not like we're not trying to get beyond our humanity. And if anything, I feel like so much of your work is about rooting us more deeply into our humanity and connecting us more with our bodies and with one another. And I just really appreciate that, because I feel like even if someone feels like they came from another planet or another dimension or another time, well, we came here into these human bodies to have a human experience. So at least this time we must be here to be human to be with each other. And so thank you. I want to ask you one final question before we go, because this podcast is called Devotion.
Mm.
And I want to know, what does devotion mean to you? And what is a place in your own life right now where you're being stretched in your devotion or challenged in your devotion?
Let me see what it feels like for me. For me, immediately that you said devotion, it was like a little pop-up of, what am I devoted to? And I heard myself say my soul,
Mm.
just being so loyal to my soul, to my voice, that wise voice within me, that ancient voice, that primal voice, the voice of my grandmother, my ancestors, the roots, the wind, the fire, the air. That is what I'm devoted to, what I'm loyal to. And where I'm being stretched right now is in my capacity to, this has been the theme, I think, for since I've gotten sober. Like, what does life look like now that you have brought in some of the things that you wanted, right? What does life look like now once you have healed some of those traumas? How do you learn to pivot into pleasure and being even more playful and even more trusting that life works? Because my framework was always like, life doesn't work, it's really hard. And I still have a lot of that in me, obviously, because I look at the world around me and I'm not blind, right? Like it sucks a lot. There's magic and there's beauty, and it also sucks. So part of the thing that I'm leaning into, that I'm being stretched, is being able to know that if I give myself permission to have pleasure and joy and really trust, it doesn't mean that I'm not deep, because I've associated deepness with a lot of my pain, which is okay. And there's a truth to that, and there's a beauty to that. And it's a big part of my work, and but my realness doesn't get taken away by my ability to have joy. And that's part of the thing that I've kind of downloaded. That's an unhealthy script that I'm working with, and that I really want to play in now and discover, is how can I retrain myself to know that I get to have this pleasure, this joy, and that I am deep, that I still have those lessons, but I don't only need to associate with that. And so I've done some work there, but I still feel like I could feel my body like, yes, that's where you need to stretch. And so I'm excited to see what that's going to look like for me and for my work.
Me too. I'm going to follow along
Yes.
on Instagram and see how this lesson unfolds and blooms in your life. And thank you so much for being here. It's been so awesome to connect with you today.
Thank you, Mama.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, I want to invite you to pre-order I Am Diosa, a journey to healing deep, loving yourself, and coming back home to soul. And we're going to pop the link to pre-order in the show notes. So thanks again. Much love. Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Before we head out today, I have an invitation that I'm really excited to bring to you. So if you've been feeling the intensity of these times, but you're also feeling your own devotion to showing up in your own unique ways with your own unique gifts, now and always, I have a free workshop coming up called Embody Your Leadership. So in this workshop, we're going to connect as a community who is devoted to giving our unique gifts in service of a more liberatory and regenerative future, while showing up in nourishing ways, which means we're devoted to showing up in ways that don't burn us out, that don't kill our relationships, and that allow for pleasure in our lives. And to show up in all the ways that really matter for us, for our world, for the collective. And in the workshop, we're going to discover your own personal North Star, which is one of my favorite ways to connect with a very rooted inspiration at any moment and give me access to deeper clarity, deeper focus, and more resilience, even and especially when things feel hard. You know, as a mom, when I have had a long night or a pretty sleepless night, or when my kid and I are going through something, or when work is just feeling difficult, or the world is feeling super intense. You know, this North Star for me is the thing that keeps me, or allows me to come back to, feeling really grounded and clear and focused. I'm also going to share some of my favorite tools for working with anxiety and overwhelm, and that especially in those times where I'm stepping up in bigger ways, right? Using my voice in a bigger way or working on new projects like this podcast, or when the fear of doing it wrong, making a mistake, messing up feels especially intense. We'll also have an opportunity to identify some of the bigger hangups that are preventing you from seeing and honoring and giving your gifts fully. And we all have these hangups. So we're going to talk about them, and we're also going to talk about what to do about them. So you can sign up for this workshop for free at embodyyourleadership.com. And I just want to say that I know it can feel really hard to feel rooted and hopeful when our livelihoods and our social structures feel tenuous and the world feels like it's burning. And yet I deeply believe that we are here, so we must be made for these times, and that it'll take each of our unique leadership to co-create the world that we dream of. So I hope you'll join us at embodyyourleadership.com. Thanks. Thank you so much for being here, beloved. I want to extend my heartfelt invitation for you to join our podcast Inner Circle for free at devotionpodcast.com. You'll receive access to show notes and free bonuses, including my favorite guided meditation when you sign up. If you loved this episode, please share it, subscribe, and I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review. Our mixing and sound design is by Lou Janot, brand design by Neverland Studio, episode images by Liv Haddon, and our theme song is From the Ground Up by Ayla Nerio. Thank you all, and thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful, and I'll talk to you soon.
We were born up in a race. From clouds above we're raining. From the crowd up we were raising. From the ground up we were building. From the clouds above we're raining. From the crowd